Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. First off, I'd like to welcome everybody that's joining. If you're coming back for your second or third or fourth customer webinar, welcome back. If this is your first one, we're glad to have you on board. I'm your host, Quentin Ellsbury. I'm a product manager on the QuickSight team, and with me, as always, is Jesse Gebhardt, who's a business development manager on the QuickSight team as well. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get going. We will have some time for live Q&A after this. We'll also try to answer as many questions as we can during the presentation. This session will cover features that have launched over the last month, as well as looking forward into some things that are coming in the very near-term future. There will be a recording available of this webinar. We'll send it out to everybody after the session. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jesse. Jesse, take us away.
Great. Thanks very much, Quentin. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Good morning to those in at least on the West Coast of the US, and good evening to those joining us internationally. We've got a lot to go through today. So lots of exciting things that have launched recently and are coming soon to QuickSight. So I've got a slide up here which covers everything that we're going to run through today. Items that have an asterisk next to them are things that are not, if you try and go try these features right after the call, you won't see them in there quite yet, but they're launching very, very soon. So as we go through these, I'll give you kind of a high level of when we expect them as well. Most of these we expect by next week, some of them by the end of the month, and some are coming in November. But nonetheless, let's jump in. We've got a lot to cover today. So first one up is cross-source joins. So this is probably one of the most commonly requested features for a very long time amongst our customer base. So this is the concept of being able to join data from any two or more types of data sources into a single data set. And then that data set could be used in whatever kind of visualizations you'd like. So for instance, let's actually just walk through a demo of this one. So apologies, we'll probably be jumping back and forth between the slide and QuickSight a fair amount today, but let's go create a new data set here. And I'm going to start with the Redshift table. So this is my first data source that I'm going to start with, but notice all the other data sources that QuickSight supports. You'd be able to join any two or more of these data sources together. So while we're going to start with Redshift, and we're going to pick one of our tables to get going on, I'm going to choose Edit Preview Data to open up the data prep screen where I could either join other tables from Redshift, but the new capability here when you choose Add Data is these other couple buttons show up here on the bottom. So while I could join tables from the same database, I've got the option to upload a file or completely switch to another data source. So for instance, like say I wanted to go join a table that I've got using Athena. So quick note is that you want to set up those other data sources ahead of time, and then you can choose them here. So you can't initiate a brand new data source from this window, but as long as you have it set up ahead of time, then you can bring it in at this point. So like say I want to bring in my buyer name table from Athena, and the way you define joins is exactly the same way as how you define joins between two tables in the same database, but these now happen to be from completely different types of data sources. So we'll see when the preview comes back here, it's going to be a combination of columns from both sets of tables that we have here. So similarly, like say I want to go add a file to this now too. Like I've got a file, a very simple example, but I've got a little file here which contains some targets or some quotas that I'm managing. Or maybe this is like a list of people that we've run campaigns against and we want to join that back against our other data set. So here I'm going to go select that same file. Gives me a little bit of a preview what it looks like, but we'll just choose next here. Again, I'm going to click on these little circles to define the join. In this case, it's going to go on the region equals the region. And now we've got 3 different sources all joined into the same data set. So really exciting new feature. We expect this to be out. Let me just double check. Current estimate is on the 22nd of this month, so only 5 days away. So we're hoping it's going to be out on Tuesday, but I would say probably pretty safe by the end of next week, but you can check around Tuesday or mid next week. And you should see those couple other buttons when you go to that add data menu there. Quick note on this, the cross-source joins is the result of this data set is always going to be brought into Spice. So if you're going to be joining across different sets of sources, notice that it's Spice only. Just a quick note there, it doesn't support live query and kind of federation between these types of sources, at least yet. So just note that this data will come into Spice. And I think in our last webinar, we had the update where Spice supports up to 100 million rows. So that had been increased from it had been increased, but also we changed how we measured it. So previously it was 25 gigabytes was the Spice limit per data set. And now it's 100 million rows or 200 gigabytes, whichever you hit first. So quite a significant increase. Realistically, you'd probably hit the 100 million rows before you hit the 200 gigs, unless you have like a really, really wide data set with hundreds and hundreds of columns. So I'd say practically consider it 100 million rows. So whenever I'm joining different sources here, the result of all those, as long as it's 100 million rows or less, then you'll be able to use this new feature. All right, so we covered cross-source joins. We expect that next week. Another exciting new one is some new mobile applications. So we've had an iOS app for a good amount of time now, but the iOS app got a really major facelift on it. And in parallel, we're launching an Android app at the same time. So while you could always use your mobile browser and view dashboards just using the browser on your phone, and you'd get a mobile optimized experience, and it was pretty good. The mobile application just kind of streamlines a lot of the interactions and just makes for a more native experience. So I am going to cross my fingers now, and I'm going to try and share my phone to the screen. All right, so I think we're going to get this working. It's awesome. All right, so I happen to be using an Android phone. If you go to the Google Play Store, you can just search for QuickSight and you'll find the preview version of this. We expect the new mobile apps to be out on the 31st of this month, so on Halloween, last day of October. So you can go just download the Android version directly from Google Play. We can share a link with you if you're using iOS, just to kind of self-invite yourself to the beta if you want to test it before the end of the month. What we can do is maybe I can share my email towards the end of the call today. And if you're very interested in testing this out in the near term on iOS, we can send you that link as well. So one cool thing is that it supports biometrics. So once you sign in for the first time, you can choose whether you want to turn on or off fingerprints. I'm not 100% sure if it does facial recognition. I think it might only be fingerprints today. But I actually only have fingerprints turned on my phone. I don't have the facial recognition, so don't quote me on that. It might work with facial as well. But now you can see this is the home screen of the new application. So I've favorited a couple of dashboards on the top. You see those where it has the stars on the top, but you could browse to all dashboards. So this is all dashboards that I have access to. And if, for instance, like I wanted to add something to my favorite, there's a little star in the upper right corner. So I just clicked on that one, the Google Analytics sample one, and I added a star to that. And as I go back to my home page, it shows up on top in my favorites. You also have a recently viewed tab for any dashboards that you've looked at recently, self-explanatory. But let's jump into one of these. So let's go to the business summary and drill downs dashboard. All right, so a couple of things to take note of. One is a different interface for switching between tabs. So I clicked on the top here where I've got this arrow here for my tabs, and I can browse to other tabs if I'd like. So kind of more optimized experience for that. Something that you could not do in the previous mobile app or using the mobile browser was using the on-screen controls for things like filters and parameters. So there's a new filter icon in the upper right, and these are any parameter controls that I've added to the dashboard, primarily used for filtering in most cases. But like if I pop one of these open, like segment, and make a selection here, so I'm going to choose SMB. And let's choose a state, just as another example. Oops. And choose done. So all the numbers in here are updating, including in my insights. But if we scroll down a bit to say like our map, remember I filtered on California. So just to kind of show that that filter is working, you see that I just have data from California remaining. The maximize and minimize for that visual is this one in the upper right here. You can kind of take full screen for a certain visual or not. So I'd maximize on that one. Drill downs work great. So like for instance, in my bar chart here, I've got some drill down set where I can drill from the industry. So like if I click on tech, my context menu will pop up from the bottom. This is like if you're using your just your laptop browser, these are the kind of things that would show up in the hover over, the little tooltip that pops up. So a little bit different interface for the mobile app. So I'm going to say drill down to customer name. And then I can pick a customer and say drill down to products. You've got this little area on the right where you can pinch. I'm dragging that blue kind of shaded area on the right to zoom in and then scroll up and down. So generally just everything much more optimized for using your finger on a very small screen like a phone. One last thing is if you have visuals that are more horizontal, like tables, for instance. So like here, I've got a table with a bunch of details on it. Now, if I maximize on this one, it'll take up the whole screen vertically at least, but it might be better if I wanted to actually show this horizontally. So I'm just going to rotate my phone now. And you can see that as long as the visual is maximized and you rotate, then the visual will rotate as well. If you're not maximizing, you're just looking at an individual sheet or a dashboard, it's always going to be in portrait mode. But as soon as you maximize, you can rotate your phone if it is helpful for that visual. All right, so that's a quick demo on the new mobile apps. Should be up by the end of the month, but again, we've got betas for these open right now. All right, so I'm going to turn this off. And let's go back to our list here. All right, so we went through the new apps. So we'll go through a couple of quick ones here. So we have a new region that we're launching, which is in Korea. So our Seoul region is launching also, we expect on Tuesday next week. Recently, we had also launched London and Frankfurt, so a couple new regions in Europe. Well, I guess London maybe technically not in Europe maybe anymore, but previously we had Dublin as our EU region, so we added Frankfurt, and then London is also an option for you. So those were launched a couple months ago, just kind of a recap, and then Seoul is the new region that we're launching soon. So next couple up, we actually highlighted these two in our previous webinar, the conditional formatting and the printing. So a couple reasons why they're still in preview and coming very soon. So conditional formatting, we've kind of expanded the scope of this feature to originally it was just for tables and pivot tables. And then we're also expanding this to other visual types like gauge charts, KPI charts, tree maps. I think those are the next three on the list. So we expect that when we go GA with this feature that it will include all those visual types. We still have the beta open for this now if you'd like to test it out. I'll do a quick review if in case you hadn't come to the previous webinar of what this feature is. It is a decently large feature and a nice improvement. And I'll cover off printing at the same time, which is also something we covered last webinar. Printing we expect to be out next week though. So conditional formatting is probably going to be end of November, and printing will just be next week. So let's take a look at both of these. So we saw some of the conditional formatting even on my phone just a couple of minutes ago, where we were looking at that table, and a couple of the columns in there had some color coding and some icons shown on them. I will show it to you on the analysis so we can actually edit it here. Sorry, I'm jumping around. Let's go to a different one. Let's go to this one. So these columns over here, which have these color-coded text and some icons and such, this is the conditional formatting feature. So you can apply it to tables and pivot tables today in the beta. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be expanding this to KPIs, whereas and gauge charts. So I could change the color of this when it crosses a threshold. Also on tree maps, I'll be able to change colors on these. But I think primarily use on tables is probably how people will use this most. So just to kind of see this applied to a new visual from scratch. So I don't have any conditional formatting applied in this table right now. But in this little visual menu, I can choose conditional formatting. I can choose what column I want to apply it to. So for instance, let's start with maybe with the profit column. And then I have three options of how I can actually format that. So I can change the background color of the cell. I can change the text color of the actual text in the cell. Or I can add icons, or I could do all three of these things, or I could just do two of them. So you can mix and match between these different options. So let's start with something like background color. And a quick note is I can also color this based on a completely different column. So say like I wanted to color this column profit, but I want to color it based on how much it increased or decreased versus last year or last month. So if I had another calculated field that was my percent difference or something, I could color it based on a completely different field. So you have that option. I'm just going to choose the same field, and here I could either choose a solid or I can choose a gradient. So if I go with a gradient, there's a couple pre-built ones, but you can also just click on these colors and choose whatever color you want to be the low end, in the middle, and whatnot. You can also input custom hex codes for custom colors here. So like say let's go with like a red, green. So I think I have a couple of like really big outliers in here. So I'm going to set the min to be like -100 and the max to be 100, just so we can see the gradient a little bit better here. So that's just one quick example. Say I want to go add formatting for a different column, and on that one I actually wanted to do it as an icon. And let's see, so I could say like if the sales was greater than or equal to 2,000, then the icon I want to put is a little smiley face, and you could change the color of the icon if you'd like as well. So hopefully that just gives you a quick idea of what this is about, but you can add more thresholds. I just said the gradient and the icon, but like if I wanted to do the same for the quantity column, if I do solid instead of gradient, then you can add as many conditions as you want. So I could say if it's greater than 10, then turn it this color, add a condition. Then if it's greater than 50, do this color. You'd actually want to reverse the order of these. So just a quick note on this is that it evaluates them in order, top to bottom. So it's going to hit condition 1, and if it meets condition 1, then it's not going to evaluate anything else after that. So like say the value is 60 in the cell, if it would hit condition 1, meaning it's greater than 10, and then it would turn it yellow. It's not going to turn it green because it would stop after that. But you can reorder these. So I could say I want to actually move this one up. So if it's great, say it was 60, it's going to turn it green. But if it was 30, it's going to miss this condition but hit this next one. So just be aware of that. You can add as many conditions as you need. Believe it or not, this is actually fairly difficult to do in a lot of other tools. Like, it's something that's been very easy in Excel and a lot of the more traditional reporting tools, like more text-based tools like Cognos and Business Objects and Oracle BI. But in some of the newer BI tools, this is actually quite difficult to do. So I'm actually very happy with how we implemented it, and hopefully you guys find it useful. So printing, we'll cover that one real quick. So there's a print button here. Again, you'll see this next week. It's kind of a what you see is what you get of the dashboard. So as I choose print on here, I can choose the size at which I want to print on. So we have some European, UK sizes, we have some Japanese sizes as well. The orientation I want to use, and then basically it opens a print preview. And it shows me where the breaks are going to be, my page breaks. So you can try and like resize and reorganize things to break the pages where you would like it to, but at least will show me where the breaks are going to be. Again, you can kind of come back in here and configure it. So I changed it to portrait instead of landscape. So now you can see that I have more visuals that fit on page 1 and more visuals that fit on page 2. And then when you click print, it's just going to open your machine's print dialog. So from there, you can choose whether you want to print it to a PDF or whether you want to print it actually out to paper if you're hooked up to a real printer. So I'll just choose print to PDF. And here's my PDF that we just printed. So printing, long time asked for feature. So finally in there. What I meant by is what you see is what you get is things like scrolling. It doesn't capture the whole scroll and like paginate through them. So just be aware of that. I'd say paginated reports is something that we are looking at doing in the future, but I think it's best for more kind of summary level reports, or if you've applied some filters and everything fits on the screen, then the printing would work really well for those scenarios. All right, so sorry I'm flying through a couple of these, but we still got a lot to do. So next couple up, visual level formatting, and then we'll actually take care of, oops, sorry. We'll do visual level formatting and a couple of these other ones. I'll show you data source sharing a little bit later, just because I think these are easier to show together. So visual level formatting and then some percentiles. All right, so visual level formatting, what this means is, to date in QuickSight, if I change the format of one of my fields, it's going to change it across all of my visuals. So like, for instance, here, I have the field I'm using is sum. I'm also using that sum of sales in this insight over here. So if I were to change this, and instead of, say I'm just going to not make it a currency, I'm going to make it a number instead. And I'll just reload real quick. So actually, I think I already have this feature turned on, which is why it is behaving the way that it did. So here it actually took the $ off of this one because I've formatted on this one to not be a currency. But on this other one, I still have it being formatted as a currency. So that's the whole point of this feature is whether if you're using the same field in multiple visuals, you can format them differently. And usually it's not that I want to make one a currency and one not, but more for things like the units that are being shown. Like for instance here, it's a very highly summarized view. So it makes sense to summarize it in thousands, where I have this K here. But maybe in another view, I actually want to show the dollar value all the way out to the actual value plus some decimals. So for those kind of things. And one, I want it summarized. The other one, I don't. Really good for those kind of use cases. So you don't need to do anything special for it. It's just that when you choose formatting options from a visual or from the field well on a visual, it just gives you a little notification here that it says applies to the selected visual that you're on. And then you'd have different formatting for a different visual. Versus if you go over to your fields here on the left and you choose formatting, this is formatting it across the board. So for all of your visuals. So that's the difference. If I choose from the left, it's for everything. If I choose from a visual that I've selected and from the field well, it's just going to be just for that visual. So that's visual level formatting. That's also should be next week on the 22nd. Something that is in there today, if you go try this out, is some new aggregation functions. So here on my sales, notice that there's some additional options here. So for instance, percentile, the standard deviations, and variance. So these were available in calculated fields before, but now they've been added to the UI in the dropdown for any metric in your field wells too. So like say, in my table here, like instead of the total sales, I actually wanted to plot what was like a median is very common. So median, we actually have a shortcut for median. So median is there, you could use that, but that would be the same as choosing the 50th percentile. But say I wanted to show like the 75th percentile. So you just enter it as an integer here. So this is now showing me, and maybe I would remove some of these columns so it's a little bit more summarized. So now this is the value of the 75th percentile of sales for each month. We can see that kind of trended over time. So a percentile, new aggregation that's going to be super helpful. Similarly, standard deviations and variances. So those are added to the all your fields now. All right, so transpose tables and some improvements to relative date filters. Table transpose is an interesting one. It's meant for very specific kind of scenarios, but the customers who had been asking for it, it was really the only way that they could do what they were asking. So the scenario is if I've got a table where I'm really just showing one row of data, usually by a filter. Like say I've got row level security and like I'm the manager of this store or the manager of this hotel or whatever it might be. And when I load this dashboard, it only loads my information and I just have one row of data here. But there's lots of other rows. It's just I can only see one of them. And I just have a bunch of categorical information that I want to show about that particular location. So if I just have a bunch of, like usually you wouldn't have any metrics in this, but it works fine if you have metrics too. It's not a problem. But like say this is a bunch of descriptive information about it. If I just wanted to show this as a list, more vertical instead, I couldn't do that previously. So while you had pivot on a pivot table, you didn't have this pivot option on a normal table. So all that's been added is this new little button here, which allows me to pivot on a normal table as well. So now it shows me just more of the layout that I was hoping for, which is all the descriptive information, particularly about this one order. If you have, typically you're going to just do this when you have one row of data, but if you have more than one row of data, that's fine. It's just going to show them as multiple columns instead of multiple rows. So it works fine if you have multiple values here too. They'll just show up as columns. And then similarly, when you add or remove totals, instead of showing on the bottom, they're going to show at the end. So you'll have them on the right. So that's the transpose on tables. The next one was around date filtering. So the relative date filters, like if you add a filter on any of your date fields, there's some more options that have been added. So you add a filter on a date field. The default is this one that's just a time range, where you pick a start and an end date. But there's another option here called relative dates, which is really useful for if you want to look at the last X periods of data, like last 90 days or last 12 months or something. So you could always do that kind of stuff. But one thing is that we didn't have an option for next 90 days or next 2 weeks. It was always the previous values. So one new thing that got added was next n. In this case, it says years, but it's just because I had years selected. So next n periods. So that's something that got added. Another thing that was added here is you can choose an anchor date. So by default, it's always going to be anchored to today, the current date and time. But you can change it to be anchored to a different day or time. You can either, actually, you would do this from a parameter. So like, say I want to show this dashboard as of 2 weeks ago or as of yesterday or something, and I want to show 14 days back from that anchor date. So if I had a date parameter, it's now going to measure the last, in this case, 2 months from whatever I choose in my date parameter. So we allowed it to change from the current date time to be like a selector instead. And then the third of the options that was added is that you can exclude certain periods. So like say I want to show the last 6 months, but my current month of data is not complete, so I don't want to show the current month. So I could say show the last 6 months, but exclude the last 1 month because it's not a complete period yet. So that was another commonly requested improvement to the relative date filters. So a few new updates to those. All right, so data source sharing. There's a couple of reasons where data source sharing is useful. So you could always share data sets before. So I think first it would maybe make sense just to describe what's the difference between a data source and a data set. So the data source is like the connection information. You're choosing what type of database you want to connect to. Like, is this Redshift? Is it an Excel file? Is it Athena? Whatever. And then if it's a database that has logins, then you can then you have your connection information. Like, what is the server name? What credentials do I want to use when I connect? So that's the data source. Then the data sets is built on top of the data source, but that's where you choose like what tables I want to connect to, and if I added any calculated fields, or I rename fields, or added filters and stuff like that. So that's more about like what fields are being used. Now, one of the issues was I could share a data set with you and make you an owner of it, and you'd be able to edit a lot of things about that data set, but there were a couple things that you still couldn't edit. Like, for instance, if I'm using custom SQL in my data set and I share this with you as an owner, you could open it up and you could change column types and rename columns, but you couldn't edit the SQL itself. And similarly, like if I shared a data set with you that had joined some tables together, you could do everything else except change the tables that were included in that. The reasoning behind it is if you don't have access to the data source, then you shouldn't see things like tables, and you shouldn't be able to execute and change SQL. So that was kind of the rationale around not letting you edit that. But the fix basically is that as long as I also share the data source with you, then now you can edit the SQL and you can edit the table joins and things like that after I share the data set with you. So remember, you have to share both to get like the full ownership, set of capabilities for the data sets. So just keep that in mind. So where you find this is admittedly a little bit tricky. So if I wanted to share a data set, that's easy enough. I go to my manage data, I click on a data set, and I have my share button. So that's easy to do. But if I want to share a data source, you need to go to the data sources page. And the way that you do that is you have to say you want to make a new data set. Then it's going to show you all the data sources that we support. But if you scroll down, you're going to see your existing data sources. And from there is where you can make edits to these. Like say my credentials for the database have updated and I need to update them in QuickSight too. Like this is where I would do that kind of stuff. This part's not new, but just pointing out this is where you would do that kind of stuff too. The part that's new is I can now share this data source. So I'm the only owner of this data source right now, but if I invite another user, I can make Neil also an owner of this. So any data sets that are created from this, Neil's also going to be able to edit the SQL and edit the tables. It also means that this data source is going to show up for Neil and he can make new data sets from this data source too. That's really like the primary use case for this is I have some credentials to the database and I don't want to have to share those credentials with everybody, but I want people to make new data sets. So I would create a data source, enter those credentials, the connection information, and share that data source with a bunch of other users. And then they can create their own data sets from that. That's really the use case for this, but there was this kind of dependency between the data source and the data sets where you couldn't edit SQL and blah, blah, blah. So it fixes that part of it too. So I hope I didn't confuse you too much on that. Now, just one other quick note on these is there's kind of some nice lineage, at least between the two. So like when I go to a data source, I can see what data sets have been built from this data source. This was not a good example, but let's see if one of these other ones is a better one. This at least was used in one other data set. So I just think of it as using it as like a check. Like say I'm trying to go share a data source with someone because they're not able to edit the SQL and XYZ data set. This just helps me check of like, is this the right data source that I want to share with them? Because I can see if the data set is actually listed here. And then it also helps like if I'm going to update the connection information or the credentials, this is at least telling me what other data sets this is going to affect. And it goes further than that. This tells me it's going to affect this data set, but if I click on this number 1, it's also telling me what analyses and dashboards were built from that data set. So it kind of shows you the trail of everything else that's going to affect down the line too, in addition to what users that has been shared with. All right, so that is the data source sharing. Just remember that you need to go click this button to make a new data set, and then you'll scroll down, and then that's where you're going to see your existing data sources. Okay, so last few here, some new dashboard publishing options. So we're just basically giving you more control when you publish a dashboard of being able to turn certain things on or off. So if we go back to the analysis we were working on together before, and I go to share and I say publish dashboard, this advanced menu, this has some new options in it that weren't there before. So some things that I think existed before were the ability to control whether the on-sheet controls should be expanded or collapsed by default. So that was there already. Hiding the filtering pane on the left-hand side, that was there already. Turning off CSV downloads, that was there already. But some of these are new, like do I want to have the hover over tooltips enabled? Or do I want to have click tooltips enabled? Or do I want to have both enabled? For drill downs, do I want to let people drill up and drill down? Do I want to let people sort? Do I want to let people maximize or minimize the visual? So generally, these are things that I would want to keep on, but there are some cases that our customers brought to us where they wanted to turn some of these specific reader capabilities off for certain scenarios. So basically this gives you that kind of, those sets of controls if you want to turn those things off. I like to expand the controls by default. Maybe it's just a preference of me, but just what this is referring to is your parameter controls, which usually you use as filters. So just so that people know that they're there from a discoverability standpoint, I like to just expand them as by default when I publish a dashboard. But if I understand if maybe you've got like 20 of these and it may take up a good amount of the screen, maybe you want to collapse them by default. So you have the control for that. All right, so last couple here, and then we'll have a bunch of time to take some questions too. So last one, I guess we can demo both of these. Parameters in titles and also in descriptions. So you can insert titles and descriptions into your analyses and dashboards today. So like I already have a title and a description shown on this one, but let's go to another one where I don't. So here I want to add a title. And I want to say that this is showing the details. So you could always add the title before, that's fine. But what's new is you have this little plus button where you can insert parameters into this now. So I could say showing details for, and then if I had any filters or parameter selections applied, like city, I can insert those into the title. So right now it's showing details for all cities. But I have a drill down in this dashboard set up where I can drill from my map to that detail sheet. So say I want to go click on LA and say see details for Los Angeles. So this is going to bring me to the second tab. And sorry, I realized that URL action is bringing me to the dashboard version of it and not to the analysis version URL. Let me try that one more time. Let's do it. Let me actually publish the dashboard after. I'm going to do the same thing. Details for, add the city, and let me go actually overwrite the dashboard now. All right, so let's try this again. So now I'm going to say see details for Los Angeles, and now my parameter has been set to LA because in my URL action, I'm setting a parameter in that URL action. So therefore, I happen to be showing the control here too, so it shows that here, but even if I wasn't showing the control, it's entered that value into the parameter for the title. So it's a good way to just kind of keep track of filters that are being applied. And we're going to expand this as well. So like expand it to things like username of who's logged in, eventually stuff like data refresh times. Like I want to say the data in this is as of the last time Spice was refreshed and kind of sticking that timestamp in there. So we're going to expand on this feature set. Right now, it's just any parameter selections that you've made, but you'll see more and more options to insert over time. And today it's part of titles and descriptions, which are for the whole sheet. And it will also expand this into things like visual titles eventually as well, which is kind of like the beginning of this feature set. So that was parameters and titles. And then last but not least, historically, there had been a number of functions that were available to you in the analysis when you were using a direct query, but not available to you when you were using Spice data sets. And over the last few months, we've made a lot of progress in terms of making sure that there's parity between Spice and direct query data sets. So this last set of functions is the last set that weren't included in Spice. So after this launch, and these are already live, you can use these now. The string functions were the only ones left that Spice didn't have. So this is things like left and right and substring and contains and stuff like that. So any kind of string functions. So now Spice, from a calculated field perspective, has full parity with direct query, specifically when you're building analyses. You could always use the same functions when you're in data prep, because those are kind of executed before we bring the data into Spice. But now, after the data is already in Spice, you still have feature parity between them. So if I go to one of my analyses and I add a calculated field, some of the string functions would be like replace. So this replaces, say I want to go through and replace all of my single quotes with double quotes, or I want to replace the letters CA with California. It replaces any text in there. Things like left and right and split, substring, these are all the string functions. And you can get more of an overview if you click on one of these. You can group them. In our help, there's functions by category, and there's a section for string functions. So these are all the ones that have been added to Spice in our last release. So really excited that it's just on par now, and I can use all the same calculated fields. The other part of this, which is related to strings, is around filtering. So if I add a filter for my identifier, like my order ID, which is a string, and I am using Spice in this data set, there were some options, like say I wanted to do a custom filter and I wanted to say like it has to begin with a certain set of letters or contain a certain set of letters, like things that did search within the string. Again, those were available for direct query, but they weren't available for Spice previously. So once you choose custom filter, you're gonna find some new options in there, particularly starts with, ends with, contains, and does not contain. So now, like if I wanted to find any ID that contained the numbers, and I'm sorry, I don't even know if this number is gonna work, but if it contains 106, looks like it actually did something, and apply that to all the visuals, then it's doing like a wildcard match, basically. This is particularly useful when you combine it with parameters. So I could have made a parameter which says search within order ID and make like a little text box. So it wouldn't be a drop down, but I could have a control here that is just an open text box. And then if I say use parameters and I choose that parameter to drive this thing, and I also have this set to contains, it's going to act like a wildcard search. And then I'll have a little text box where I could perform wildcard search and use it as a filter. So I think the combination of those two things together make it particularly useful. All right, so that wraps up everything that is coming in the very near future and things that are already launched. So I'll just maximize this one more time just so we can kind of review. So cross-source joins, we expect this next week. I'm sorry, this should be next week. Mobile apps by the end of the month. New region, Seoul is next week. Conditional formatting is end of November. Printing is next week. Visual formatting is next week. Relative date filters next week. Dashboard publish options next week. And parameter titles is next week. The only two that aren't next week are conditional formatting and the mobile apps. So lots of really exciting stuff coming soon. I know there's some questions in there. I'm going to get to those in just a minute. I want to address that there's probably a couple other buttons over here on the left that you might be wondering about what those are. These are also coming pretty soon, probably within the next, like theming is probably going to be in November, and same with actions, probably in November as well, potentially by the end of this month. But these are some huge features as well. And given that we're probably not going to meet together again until December, we're doing these bi-monthly now, or every other month. I think these are useful to show today. So let's create a little example here. I'm going to go back to where I've got this table, and I'm going to add another visual where I've got, let's just make like a customer bar chart. So actions does things like filter actions. So this behavior is like if I want to click on Delta Airlines and have this bottom visual filter to Delta, that's what this does. It'll filter all the other visuals on the same dashboard or just some of them. You can control what gets affected by it, what fields you want to send as the filters. So here, if I come to actions, I can define a custom action, or there's a quick create, which says just filter everything on the same sheet. So I have this chart selected. If I click filter same sheet visuals, I only have one other visual on this, but say there were 5 other visuals on this, it's going to affect all 5 of the other visuals. So now as I select Delta, my table is going to update just to Delta. When I select all state, it's going to update just to alt state. So you can see this over here. This is like huge. We've been, our customers and myself, we've been waiting for this feature for a large amount of time. I am so excited that this is going to be in here. It just opens so many more ways to ask questions on dashboards and so many new ways of drilling down and just a lot more power for your end users, because readers are going to be able to do this stuff too. So massive new feature coming, which is these filter actions. So expect these within, I think probably within the next 4 weeks or so, maybe 6 weeks. Don't quote me exactly on it, but it's coming soon. Themes, another massive feature. While we had added the ability to change colors, like this is a custom color that I had added here. Like I want to change the color of this slice to be whatever hex code. So you could change colors in visuals, but like what if I wanted to skin this whole dashboard to be like a dark theme? Like the background should be dark and the text should be light, stuff like that. And we had this asked particularly from customers who are embedding QuickSight a lot. Like if you're embedding QuickSight in your application, you want our dashboards to match the look and feel of your application so that people don't think it's something different. They think it's just your app. So the themes area, you're going to have, there's always the classic theme, and then you'll have X number of themes that you've created. So I'm just going to make a new one. We're going to say save as on the classic theme, and then you could give it a name. And then you've got a whole bunch of options, like pretty much every color on the screen you're going to be able to customize. So big ones would be like the background color. I want to change the background color to be dark, and I want to change my text foreground to be light. The secondary background color is for things like the tabs and the titles and the controls. So I also want those to be dark. Right, so now within a few clicks, I've changed this to be a dark theme. Other really useful things in here, like if you notice on my dashboards, there's no gray border between any of my visuals. They're much more compact. I had already turned this on previously, but this is something you'll be able to do with the theming as well. This is what are called borders. So if you uncheck borders, it's going to look exactly like how I have it on my screen right now. And then margins like between visuals and the gutter. This is just kind of trying to make things as compact as possible. So removing a bunch of white space essentially. So some things around layouts, and then like default colors for charts. When I make new charts, what should the default colors be? Specifically around controls, buttons, and links, like what color should a hyperlink be? And when I hover over, what color should it be? So like you have control over literally everything. So as I save this as a new theme, I can then go apply it to this analysis and dashboard, or I can apply it to a different one. So as I go back to my themes, it'll show up here where I have this one called demo, and I can hit apply. And this is just stuff that is part of authoring. You'll actually be able to change these too once this is out. But after I publish this as a dashboard, these parts that are white are going to go away anyway. So just kind of ignore them for now. So I've applied it to this one, but I could even go reuse that theme on a completely different analysis. So if I go to this other one and go to my themes and go apply that demo theme here, same thing. So another very, very big feature that that customers have been asking for a while. There's going to be an API that goes along with this too. So while we have a really nice UI for it, there are use cases where like I have 100 customers and I want to publish 100 different dashboards, and I want to apply their custom colors to that. I want a different theme per customer and a different data set per customer. So there's APIs in preview right now for things like programmatically creating data sets and applying dashboards as templates. And then the theming API will also allow you to skin that dashboard too, and you could do it differently for every single customer you have. So control all this stuff programmatically as well. All right, so I'm sorry, but I took up most of the time here. I'm happy to stay on for questions a little bit longer. Just to wrap up before we get to the questions, I just want to point out that if you just Google QuickSight What's New, you'll find in our help docs the What's New page. And that's where you're going to find, like, as soon as things launch, you'll see them listed there. There's some other really helpful links in there, such as signing up for the webinar that you guys are on today. So you don't necessarily need this link, but you can share that with other folks. But you can also sign up for our newsletter here. So we do a monthly newsletter, and you can self-sign up for that too. So some of the things that we covered today, like sharing data sources and the percentile aggregations and the wildcard filters for spice and table transpose, those I mentioned launched last week. So they're here. The stuff that launches next week will show up here as soon as we launch it. All right, so for those of you that don't have questions, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you on the next webinar, which we expect to be in December, because we're doing these every 2 months now. I will throw my email up on the screen here in case you guys have follow-up questions, or if any of these that are in beta you're interested in testing out. This is my email. And now we'll jump over to questions.
Awesome, Jesse. Fantastic walkthrough and presentation as always. Everybody who stayed on got a little lucky at the end and got to see some features that were under wraps. As a representative of the product team, I'm looking at you with a little sideways glance, Jesse, but I think that's pretty cool.
Yes. Keep this all confidential, but
well, if that doesn't give all of our customers and attendees a reason to attend our webinar, I don't know what does. You never know what you're going to get. Thanks everybody for joining. Hey, Jesse, one question that I think has came up a couple times. There were some people that missed the beginning around cross-source joins. Is also maybe if we can see how that cascades into being what it enables in terms of the charts and the visuals that you can create. That feature does allow you to bring data from multiple sources together and then plot that into a singular chart, which is something that was not possible before in QuickSight, in terms of inside of QuickSight being able to get data from multiple sources and then combine that into a single visual without having to have done that in your external database or something beforehand.
Yes, it's a good point. So in some tools, I know it works more like you would select a visual and you can use multiple data sets in that visual. This is a little bit different, whereas you're still just going to use one data set per visual, but inside that data set, you could join as many different data sources as you want. So just to clarify on that. But the end goal is still kind of the same thing, as I want to use data from different places in the same visual. We just build that into the single data set, and then I can use that in my visual.
Great. So hopefully that there was a specific question about that, and that is how you would do that now, is with using the cross-source joins feature when it comes out. Is in the data prep, you can combine data from multiple sources, and then when you get into the analysis mode, you can then build your charts off that data set with that joined data. Does anybody else have any questions? I tried to answer most of them along the way. So if there's anything that we missed, go ahead and drop them into the panel. Just feel free to grab any that you wanted.
Yeah, I'll take a look at some of the open ones. So question, will the contents of drop-down controls also adapt to the filter on the page? So like limiting it to like a global filter. I think I know what you mean. And yes, you can do that today. So if I come back to one of these other ones, if you have a more than one control, I don't have a particularly great example set up right now, but like say I had cities and states, and on my city one, I want to go have that respond to my state filter. So that's what this little button on the bottom is here. So when you go and edit a control, you have this option where I can say show relevant values only. And when you click on that, you can tell us what other filters I should be listening to. And what other parameters specifically. So like, this is where I would choose state. I'm on my city filter, theoretically, and then here's where I would go choose the state one. And then whenever I change something in state, it's going to filter down my city one as well. So you can kind of cascade and have them respond to one another by using this show relevant values option. Let's see if there's others. Is there a way to back up an analysis / restore to a previous version of an analysis? There's kind of like a roundabout way of doing it. So you can create analyses from a dashboard using the save as. So like if I had that analysis called business summary and I want to duplicate it, if I come to the dashboard, and as long as I have save as permissions, and if you're an owner of it, you automatically do. When you save as, it makes a new analysis. So like this is a way to just kind of archive an analysis and like back it up. That's the kind of like a little workaround to do it. Also keep in mind that this undo button will go back all the way to the first field you've ever dragged onto that analysis. Even if it was like a year ago, or even if there's 10 different users that have edited this thing, it keeps the history across users, across sessions, across time. So this undo button will go all the way back, as I said, to when you first open this thing up. So that's a way to kind of reverse things if you got into a bad spot. I'd say those are couple options. I mentioned we also have a bunch of APIs coming where I can duplicate analyses and copy them from one account to another account. So like migrating from a dev to a prod account. Those are things that are going to be possible with these new APIs. We will also be building stuff like true versioning into QuickSight specifically for dashboards, like being able to roll back to previous versions of a dashboard. And that's not in the too distant future. Expect that before the end of the year too. So just a couple comments on versioning and rolling back. Quick question from Luis on, instead of joining, I'm doing a union. So currently we don't support unioning across different data sets, data sources, I should say. So you can join different data sources in a data set, but you aren't able to union them quite yet. If there are tables in the same database, you could use the custom SQL to do unions. We don't allow those through the UI quite yet, but again, things that that will improve on the data prep side of things. Can the colors on the heat map be changed anytime soon? Yes. With the launch of conditional formatting, you will be able to change them on heat maps as well. So you'll be able to choose the thresholds of where you want to change the colors for your heat maps. Yeah, that's going to be the best way to do it. Also with themes, it should allow you to do it. Like in a theme, you notice in color, or sorry, in data, this positive negative gradient and the min max gradient. So if you have negative values, it defaults to this one. If you have just one scalar value with no negatives, then it would do this one. So you'd be able to change that here too.
To see that last question about generating PDFs, that's just a default option from your machine's print dialog. Is you can, instead of actually printing it, you can save it as a PDF, correct?
Yes, correct. So the print option also will print to PDF. So that, I think that's primarily how people use it, but you can certainly print out to paper if you'd like. But yes, the print button is also works for printing to PDFs. The emailing report option is more like an embedded image inside of the email, which doesn't have page breaks or anything like that. So I think it's even a little bit better than giving someone a PDF, because like if you have a really long dashboard, it'll just show as like a nice image inside of the email, and you can zoom and pinch, and it works better as an image that way. You can't attach a PDF to an email using the email report functionality quite yet, but if you emailed the report to someone, they could click on the link that comes in that email and then go print to a PDF from there. That'd be kind of the workflow.
Cool. And then I'll take the last two questions are related, which is when are themes and actions going to be released? Those are in development now. Our expectation is that they'll be available towards the end of November, early December, but those are not concrete timelines. Again, those are early stage features that are in development. We'll be sure to let you know when they're available, and pretty good chance we'll be covering them in the December webinar as publicly available features for everybody. So you'll get another chance to see them in their fully evolved and finalized states. All right, with that, I want to say thanks to everybody for joining us. Again, a recording of this webinar will be made available and sent out to everyone. Thanks for the questions and for sticking with us. We went 10 minutes over time. Jesse, thanks again for an incredible presentation and demo as always. And with that, everyone have a great day, great evening, and look forward to speaking with you in December.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.